Good morning. This is Dylan Jovine with Behind the Markets. Happy Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, September 24th. It is the last Wednesday in September. A lot of folks texted me and who watch these videos to ask my opinion of yesterday. I talked about that this market right now is more overvalued than the 1929 dot-com crash during the go-go 60s. And of course, it's more overvalued than the dot-com crash. So 1929, the go-go 60s, and the dot-com. And a friend of mine asked me yesterday, which one do you think it's most like of those three? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think it has similarities with all of those. For example, it has similarities with 29. 29 was a tech bubble. Basically, RCA radio is going to be the biggest thing in the world. The 60s were a tech bubble too, birth control pill, television stations, all that kind of stuff. And the 90s were a tech bubble most of us were adult enough to live through. Obviously a tech bubble, the rolling out of the internet and telecommunications and all this kind of stuff. So it has similarities with all of those prior bubbles. The big difference is that actually the big difference in my view are all the other things going on around. For example, inflation, the rise of populism, which we talked a little bit about yesterday. So I think we have to go a little bit further back in American history to find a bubble this big. And really, it reminds me of the conditions that led up to the Panic of 1893. And if you look at the Panic of 1893, at the time, this was the Great Depression until the Great Depression actually came. But this was the Great Depression. Unemployment after this reached 30-40% in many states. It was brutal. And the Panic of 1893, when you think of the things that led up to that, basically it was after the Civil War. Civil War is finished, 1865. For the next 30 years, America wants to go back to the business of business. We're stitching railroads across the continent. We've become a continental power in the true sense of the word. We're dealing with the Native Americans and all this other stuff. And railroads were the big technology of the day. They were the AI of the day. They were Nvidia of the day, Union Pacific Railroad, and all these railroad companies, Commodore Vanderbilt and Jay Gould, and all these operators building railroads, and of course Standard Oil, cutting deals with railroads. So basically, you had the big technology of the day, of that day, were the railroads, which were revolutionary to people, obviously, of course. Huge. And of course, overinvestment. The underpinnings, the other things that we have today really remind me of that in a way. 1929, the go-go 60s and the dot-com crash do not. They also had inflation back then. We have inflation right now. People are getting left behind. They're feeling very left behind, which is one of the reasons gold has hit an all-time high again yesterday. It's another day, another high for gold. So it's very reminiscent of that. The other thing is we had populism back then, prairie populism. Remember, after the Civil War, we started to industrialize. We started to really become a manufacturing economy, and a lot of farmers started losing their jobs. People were being sucked from the prairies, from farms, into the city. So a lot of towns were starting to die, really, and it brought up this rise of populism. This is during the Gilded Age. It's the Gilded Age in places like New York and San Francisco. They're striking gold and building railroads, but it's not the Gilded Age for the middle of the country. For the middle of the country, it's prairie populism is what they called it. They were very angry. They were left behind. Also, we were on the gold standard back then, but they wanted to actually turn it into the gold and silver standard. They basically wanted inflation because a lot of these small farmers owed a lot of money to debt holders in the East Coast. And look, inflation is great for debt holders. If I owe you $100,000, that's a fixed amount I owe you. But if inflation keeps pushing up my salary and stock market and all that stuff, I'm inflating away my money. I'm getting a bigger pile of money, but the amount I owe you is a fixed amount. So I'm able to pay you back with inflation-generated dollars, which is why our government is basically pushing so much inflation, because it's the only way we can pay our debt. That's why gold has gone up so well. And of course, William Jennings Bryan was running for office at the time. He ran 3 times and, gave a speech at the Democratic Convention that is considered one of the great speeches of all time. What was he, 35 at the time? And he goes into the Democratic Convention, had been a 2-term representative, and gives a speech about populism, basically, that takes this no-name person and gets him on the ticket to become Democratic president. The panic of 1893, the conditions that led up to that, this revolutionary new technology, railroads, overinvestment in that technology, inflation, using inflation to print away money, the rise of populism, angry populism. And again, it's very much like that right now, where back then we were going from a farm and agricultural economy to an industrial economy. Right now, we're going from an industrial economy towards obviously an information economy. And that's been accelerating, and it's going to accelerate with AI. It's gotten to the point where I think to myself, what are my kids going to do in this kind of situation? So again, look, we are at a market that is super high. As I said yesterday, we see deal after deal. Nvidia is investing this and with OpenAI and doing all that. Among the companies, all these deals between these companies is fabulous. But remember something, that only accounts for 30% of economic activity. 70% of economic activity is consumer spending. And these consumers are starting to feel a little bit of pain. So we are going to have to watch to see how this unfolds. But we will continue to lighten a lot of our certainly riskier positions. Anyway, that is all I have today. Have a wonderful day. I will see you tomorrow.